Again, back on Lamentations chapter 4, this time looking at verses 12 through 20. Notice that stops us 2 verses short of finishing chapter 4. We'll deal with that next time. The title, The Lord's Anger. Actually, there are multiple things we're going to look at least 3. The Lord's anger is the focus for much of what we're going to say, but we're looking for essentially 3 separate causes that contributed to the siege that what Jerusalem is now going under, or undergoing, take your pick. So we're going to extend our look into this. Again, there's only going to be 4 verses or 4 lines for each verse, as we had last time. In these verses, we're going to be reminded again of the base causes of the siege that lasted 2 years and devastated all those that remained in Jerusalem. Remember, this was also the 3rd siege. It was the 3rd entrance into Jerusalem, and it was the 3rd exile from Jerusalem on the part of Babylon. The times go from 605 BC, 597 BC, and then the siege from 588 to 586 BC. 586 BC be the time normally given to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. There have been other times that Jerusalem had been entered by attacking armies, but prior to Babylon's attacks, the city had been fortified significantly and a water system dug. Why is that important? Well, if you can't get water from within the city, then you're not going to get water when you have a siege going on. But, so we had the gap between the earlier times when armies went into Jerusalem and this time. And the difference was the building up of the fortifications of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was generally perceived as impregnable. We'll see that in some of the early verses. But that sense was based on 2 factors. The first is the fortified work that had been done since the last time an army entered Jerusalem. The second one is the protecting presence of Yahweh. And that's going to be interesting. As long as Yahweh was present in the city thought it was safe from harm. Even Assyria's Sennacherib, some of these names, some of these multi-syllable words again. He was the leader of the Assyrian army. He was the king, but he was repelled when he attempted to take Jerusalem after he had destroyed the northern kingdom. He destroyed the northern kingdom in 722 BC, and they never became a functioning nation after that. They were wiped off the map. Sennacherib thinks, I'm going to go down Jerusalem, do the same thing. Why not? Well, I got a bunch of verses here. Looks like 2, 7, probably a dozen verses out of Isaiah talking about this event where Sennacherib was repelled. And it was not because of the fortifications. Keep an eye on that. So we're going to begin in Isaiah 37. Read verses 1 and 2 first, and we'll move on. And when King Hezekiah, one of the good kings of Judah, and there was a couple before Josiah, when King Hezekiah heard it, that is the rantings of Sennacherib's servant, who said, you can count on whatever you want to count, but that won't stop us. The king tore his clothes, covered himself with sackcloth, and entered the house of the Lord, which would be, of course, the temple. Then he sent Eliakim, who was over the household with Shebna, the scribe, and the elders of the priests, covered with sackcloth, to Isaiah. The sackcloth, of course, says we're in mourning, we're in fear. He's going to send these people dressed that way, to Isaiah, the prophet, the son of Amos. And then moving to verse 4, perhaps the Lord your God, and this is Hezekiah speaking to Isaiah through his messengers, perhaps the Lord your God will hear the words of Rabshakeh, whom his master, the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, has sent to reproach the living God. So they couched all of the statements that the representative of Sennacherib was making fun of the Israelites, and he was doing it by saying your God can't protect you, so he's bad-mouthing Yahweh. Perhaps the Lord your God will hear the words whom his master, the king of Assyria, had sent to reproach the living God. They said, Sennacherib did this just to badmouth you, Lord, to give you a hard time, to say you can't do this, you can't do that, blaspheme. That's what it was. And will rebuke the words which the Lord your God has heard. So he's asking God to deal with the words that the servant of Sennacherib gave to those on the walls of Jerusalem, on the top of the walls. He heard all of this, and so he said, send God to rebuke that, or to rebuff it. Therefore, offer a prayer for the remnant that is left. So a lot of people had bugged out of Jerusalem at that time too, apparently. And Isaiah said to them, thus shall you say to your master the king, thus says the Lord, do not be afraid because of the words that you have heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Don't sweat that. Then Yahweh sent an encouraging promise, beginning in verse 7. Behold, I will put a spirit in him, Sennacherib, or the messenger, but I think Sennacherib, so that he shall hear a rumor and return to his own land. And I will make him fall by the sword in his own hand. You catch that? He said he's going to run for no reason. And when he gets back to his own land, I'm going to make sure he dies. So this is a guy who blasphemed God, thought he could get those in Jerusalem to give up easily. And God said, don't sweat it. He's going to go back without doing anything, and he's going to get killed. Verse 31, and the surviving remnant of the house of Judah shall again take root downward and bear fruit upward. He said, Jerusalem will prosper again. For out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant, and out of Mount Zion survivors. The zeal of the Lord of hosts shall perform this. So God says, don't sweat it. I've got it. I'll take care of it. Things will work out. Verse 32, for out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant, and as I'm repeating myself, of course, and out of Mount Zion survivors. The zeal of the Lord shall perform this. Therefore, thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, which is Sennacherib, he shall not come to this city, or shoot an arrow there. Neither shall he come before it with a shield, nor throw up a mount against it. He said, this guy's not going to do anything when it comes to Jerusalem. Just watch and see. Verse 34, by the way that he came, by the same he shall return. He's going to come here, do nothing, and leave. He go back the same way he came. And he shall not come to the city, declares the Lord. And in verse 35, I will defend this city to save it, for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. He said, I'm going to make sure everything stays put. Verse 36, and the angel of the Lord went out. This is Malach Yahweh, that many of you have heard me talk sometimes extensively about. The angel of Jehovah, the angel of the Lord, Malach Yahweh, went out and struck 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. That's 185,000 Syrian soldiers. The angel of the Lord wiped out in one evening. And when men arose early in the morning, behold, all of these were dead. You think God can't kill? There is Malach Yahweh, whom, as most of you who've been with us for a while know, I believe was the pre-incarnate Christ, the second person of the Trinity. The second person of the Trinity in the form of an angel, or being called by the title Angel of Yahweh. By the way, that's the only angel that has Yahweh attached to his name. What happened? He killed 185,000 of them overnight. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and returned home and lived at Nineveh, which, remember, was the major city of Assyria. It's where Jonah was sent. Now let's move on to verse 38. We're not quite finished with this story. Remember, there was a prophecy that we haven't gotten to yet. Well, here it comes. And it came about as he, Sennacherib, was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, that Adrammelech and Sharezer, his sons, killed him with the sword. So not only was the prophecy about Sennacherib being killed come true, as the Lord claimed it would, it was his own sons that did the deed. And they, the two sons, escaped into the land of Ararat, which was north into Turkey. And Esarhaddon, his son, Sennacherib's third son, became king in his place. So, what are we going to look at today? Well, we've already dealt with where the invincibility of Jerusalem comes from. It's well fortified, yes, but its protection comes from the presence of Yahweh. Our verses today deal with 3 reasons why the Babylonian siege took place. None of the reasons are because of Babylon itself directly. The first thing that we'll look at is the corrupt religious leadership. Corrupt prophets, corrupt priests. And that's going to be in verses 12 through 16. Second major point is the failed foreign alliances. Rather than trust Yahweh, they tried to make alliances with other nations, principally Egypt. And we're going to look at that in verses 17, 18, and 19. Then finally, in verse 20, we will look at the king's rebellion, and this was Zedekiah, a man put on the throne by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. He was not a true king. He was not a Davidic king, but he had been there for about 11 years, and he decided to tell Nebuchadnezzar to bug off, Nebuchadnezzar, to buzz off, and he was no longer going to be a vassal state. He was no longer going to pay tribute. Well, Nebuchadnezzar had other ideas about it, and that is the driving thing which forced Nebuchadnezzar's hand. Well, let's go back to Lamentations, verse 12, Lamed. Lamentations 4:12. The kings of the earth did not believe, nor did any of the inhabitants of the world believe, that the adversary and the enemy of Jerusalem, of Judah, could enter the gates of Jerusalem. So what are they saying here? That generally it was believed that Jerusalem was impregnable, couldn't be breached with the siege, and could not be taken. And of course, remember the last guy that tried was Sennacherib, and you saw what happened there. So let's take a look at my version of the 4 lines. It was believed by most rulers in the world, even general citizens shared their belief, the belief of the rulers, that Israel's enemies could not enter her walls into the city. But again, the ultimate wild card, the presence of Yahweh. Without Yahweh's presence, Jerusalem was just another fortified city. But with Yahweh's presence, it was something extra special. But lose Yahweh's presence, everybody's open for game. Let's look at verse 13. Mem is going to tell us, might tell us how Yahweh's presence left the city, or how that came about to happen. So, Lamentations 4:13. Because of the sins of her prophets, there we go, and the iniquities of her priests, who have shed in her midst, in Jerusalem's midst, the blood of the righteous. So what do we have? Prophets and priests who are corrupt, even killers. So let's take my version of those 4 lines. There are a little bit longer versions, so they'll look like they're way more than 4, but they're only 4. The prophets who were to deliver God's words to the people were corrupt and sinful. The priests, the intermediaries between Yahweh and the people, they stood and presented the people's side of things to Yahweh, were corrupt, just like the prophets. Both groups of religious leaders were responsible for the deaths of righteous, innocent people. They had blood guilt. And you know God takes blood guilt very seriously. Jeremiah explained Yahweh's take on those things. I'm looking now at Jeremiah 7, verses 3, 4, and 5. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, amend your ways and your deeds, and I will let you dwell in this place. There's a big F. If you mend your ways and deeds, I'll let you dwell. Do not trust in deceptive words, saying, and listen to this, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. They were using that like a magic potion of some sort. You just mumble the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, and nothing can happen. Verse 5, for if you truly amend your ways and your deeds, if you truly practice justice between a man and his neighbors, and I'm going to go down to verse 9, will you steal and murder and commit adultery and swear falsely and offer sacrifices to Baal and walk after other gods that you have not known? Then come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, we are delivered. We are saved. God's making a bit of a mockery of that. He said, I told you, you live properly, you can stay. But look at what you're doing. That you may do all these abominations. And I'm just going to sit here, drop down now to verse 12. But go now, he's telling them, go to my place, which was in Shiloh. When they first went into Canaan, the tabernacle was placed in Shiloh. That was the religious center of Israel at that time. Remained that way for about almost 400 years, 370 or something like that. But go to my place, which was in Shiloh. I want you to see something, he's saying, where I made my name dwell at first, and see what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people Israel. And now, because you have done all these things, declares Yahweh, and I spoke to you, rising early and speaking, but you did not hear, and I called you, but you did not answer. Verse 14, therefore I will do to the house which is called by my name, that's the temple, in which you trust, with that temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, temple of the Lord, and to the place which I gave you and your fathers, as I did to Shiloh. Shiloh did not exist at this time. It would have been a ruins at best if there was even any evidence of it. Verse 15, and I will cast you out of my sight, as I have cast out all your brothers, all the offspring of Ephraim. Ephraim is a name also used for the northern kingdom. And remember God saying, look, 150 years ago, there was no Shiloh at that time, but at that time there was a northern kingdom. Watch and see what happened to it. It doesn't exist anymore. You get the point, guys? Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, my anger and my wrath will be poured out on this place, speaking of the temple and Jerusalem, on man and on beast and on trees of the field and on the fruit of the ground, and it will burn and not be quenched. And that's how the destruction took place. It was by fire that we've mentioned before. Or if we haven't, we will. For 369 years, the sanctuary stood in Shiloh. On the death of the tabernacle, well, actually, what happened was, remember the ark was captured by the Philistines and took off? And there were like 30,000 Israelis were killed in the battle around Shiloh. And two of those who died were the chief priest's sons. And that priest's name was Eli, if I remember right, the priest to whom Hannah gave her son Samuel to be God's man. But it was destroyed when the Philistines captured Shiloh, the Ark of the Covenant. It was about 1050 BC. So it was like 170 years before this. And it was, no, longer than that, wasn't it? Almost 500 years, 450 years before this. It was even, couple 300 years before the northern kingdom was wiped out, that Shiloh ceased to exist. God's temple in the form of the tabernacle, and actually I believe they had built a stone building covered with the top tent part from the tabernacle, and that was the replacement for the tabernacle. But that was the center of God's presence in Israel at that time, and God said, I destroyed it. Of course, it went through the Philistines and such involved, but it was God's doing. He claims that it was his. I'm going to shift now to Ezekiel 9, 8, and 10. And this is Ezekiel crying out for Jerusalem and the temple, but there's something coming up, but I want you to see. Then it came about, that's Ezekiel, was alone was left, that I fell on my face crying out and saying, Alas, Lord God, art thou destroying the whole remnant of Israel by pouring out thy wrath on Jerusalem? So he actually had much the same attitude as Lamentations. He said, I can't understand. You going to wipe out every remnant of the faithful from Israel? Of course, the answer is no. God always keeps a faithful remnant at hand. Then he, Yahweh, said to me, the iniquity of the house of Israel and Judah is very, very great. And the land is filled with blood, some of it shed by the priests and the prophets, false prophets, obviously, and corrupt priests. And the city is full of perversion, If you remember, if you go back and read Habakkuk, that was what Habakkuk was getting after God about. How can you look at all this perversion in Jerusalem, in your city, in your people, and do nothing? And God let him know that it wasn't true that he was doing nothing. He said, I'm taking care of it, and I'm going to tell you about it. But when you hear how I'm going to deal with this perversion, you're not going to like it. And of course, he was speaking of the Babylonians, which is the same thing we're talking about here. For they say, the Lord, and this is now they, the people of Jerusalem, are saying, the Lord has forsaken the land, and the Lord does not see. God's gone blind all of a sudden. But as for me, now it's Ezekiel speaking, God speaking, my eye will have no pity, nor shall I spare, but I shall bring their conduct upon their heads. I'd like to read it, I'll bring their conduct down upon their heads. And then if we go to verses 18 and 19 in Ezekiel 10, then the glory, and this is Ezekiel saying what he saw, then the glory of the Lord departed from over the threshold of the temple. God says, you say the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. That's some kind of magic thing that will protect you. Watch this when I leave. And that's what Ezekiel saw. One more time, let's go back to Lamentations, verse 14. None, N-U-N. Lamentations 4:14. They wandered, blind in the streets. They were defiled with blood. He's speaking now about the prophets, the corrupt prophets and priests. They were defiled with blood, so that no one could touch their garments. Does that sound familiar? He's saying that things were so bad in the streets with the priests and the prophets that they were treated as if they were moral lepers. We wouldn't even touch their garment. People wanted nothing to do with them. Our translation of the 4 lines that we give looks something like this. The religious leaders wandered aimlessly in the streets of Jerusalem. Their murderous ways made them blood guilty. As moral lepers, no one had a desire to touch them or even their garments. The prophets and priests were treated as unclean moral lepers, which is rather interesting, because if they were truly unclean, what did it mean? The unclean could not enter the temple. So what did that mean for priests? They couldn't perform their jobs. God rendered them inappropriate to do his work. He said, look at them. They can't serve before me. And again, Leviticus 13 in verses 45 and 46, I won't read it. It just says that the unclean had to stay outside the camp. They had to live outside the community. And these people were being seen as moral lepers. Evidently, lay people were shunning these religious leaders who were corrupt. Lamentations 4:15. Depart, unclean, they cried of themselves. Depart, depart, do not touch. So now, in verse 15, the poet is saying that the corrupt priests and prophets themselves are saying, we're unclean, we're unclean. He said it's gotten that bad. So they fled and wandered. This is the priests and the prophets now are being scattered. Men among the nations, Gentiles are saying, they shall not continue to dwell with us. Gentiles don't want any part of them. Well, let me give you my take on those 4 lines. The prophets and the priests responded like true lepers, crying out, unclean, get away, don't touch. They themselves fled the people and wandered aimlessly. Gentiles spoke of them, saying, they ain't living with us. Apparently, God was the one who was scattering these corrupted religious leaders. He's having no part of people who serve him corruptly. Verse 16, Ayin, A-Y-I-N, Lamentations 4:16. The presence of the Lord has scattered them. He will not continue to regard them. They did not honor the priests. They did not favor the elders. I don't know why I want to put a T in elders. So, how do we treat these 4 lines? They scatter, that's the priests and prophets, scatter from wherever Yahweh's presence is, which means really wherever they sense that he is. Yahweh has no use for them anymore. The people did not honor the priests, nor did they honor the prophets. Now our attention's going to turn. We're going to leave these corrupt leadership, this corrupted leadership, as a cause for the siege. We know that that's part of why all of this has taken place, why God is angry. We're going to turn to the nation's failed attempt to face up to Babylon through alliances with other nations, and again, particularly Egypt. There's something unstated to this point. A corrupt religious leadership could not bring unity that is needed for military action. So, now they can't even fight themselves against Babylon, whoever's left. They can't do it because religious matters are in such an upheaval that there's no unity. And you have to have a unified body to fight. So they go out looking for, in this case, Egypt. I think there's some possibility that they went to Ammon either, which is interesting because Ammon is typically an enemy, as Egypt was at times. So Judea is helpless in the face of an aggressive Babylonian military. So let's see what verse 17 says. Peh, P-E-H, Lamentations 4:17. Yet our eyes failed, looking for help was useless. In our watching, we have watched for a nation that could not save. Our version of those 4 lines, going to say much the same, of course. We looked and looked to no avail. No nation could help us against Babylon. We kept trying to find some nation to help, but none could deliver us. So, this is part of Zedekiah's doing. He's the one who tried to get a connection with Egypt. By the way, the original back in 605, one of the reasons that Babylon came in and made Israel a vassal state was so that Israel would not be aligned with Egypt, so that Egypt couldn't come in, connect with Judah, and make a major military force to oppose Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar was trying to put the kibosh on any kind of alliance or hookup early on, by 605, I think it was. The real problem, of course, is that Israel no longer trusted Yahweh to deliver them. That was the way it was supposed to work. Yahweh's presence was their protection, their deliverance. Not Egypt, not Ammon, not any other nation. It was to be Yahweh. Babylon was top dog in the area, big area, the whole Middle East. No nation could deliver from them at all at that time. Jeremiah warned Judah in Jeremiah 37, 6-10. He warned Judah, and Ezekiel did the same thing in Ezekiel 29, 6 and 7, said, don't go to Egypt, they won't be able to handle it. Well, Zedekiah did go to Egypt, and Babylon handled it. As a matter of fact, we'll mention probably later that when Zedekiah made the alliance with Egypt and asked them to deliver them to stop Babylon, Babylon left the siege momentarily, went out and destroyed the army of Egypt, promptly turned around, came back, and the siege continued. Zadik, verse 18, Lamentations 4:18. Here are the people talking now, what have happened. They hunted our steps so that we could not walk in our streets. We couldn't even get around in our own streets. Our end drew near. Our days were finished. For our end had come. Sounds like loss of hope, doesn't it? Well, here we go with our version. We were hunted down. We couldn't even walk in our own streets in safety. Our end was inevitable, our days over. The end has come for us. Habakkuk 1:8 is kind of an interesting verse. He had warned, Habakkuk had warned, of Babylon's military prowess, and he did it this way in Habakkuk 1:8. Their horses, that's the Babylonians, of course, are swifter than leopards and keener than wolves in the evening. That's what they're hunting for their food. Their horsemen come galloping. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle swooping down to devour. This is an army that could move fast, blitzkrieg if you prefer, and take over. So Kof, verse 19, Lamentations 4:19, our pursuers were swifter than the eagles of the sky. So they agreed with Habakkuk. They chased us on the mountains. They waited in ambush for us in the wilderness. Remember the one said, we can't even walk in our streets in safety. They're hunting us down. My take, Babylon's army moves too quickly for us, as quickly as eagles. They chased us wherever we went. They ambushed us at will. And then they're essentially saying we were helpless before Babylon's army. So, and our last verse, which takes a bit of a shift here, Resh, verse 20, Lamentations 4:20. And this is talking now about Zedekiah. The breath of our nostrils, the Lord's anointed. In other words, they're saying the Lord's anointed, which is typically a term meaning the king. Their breath was captured in their pits, in the Babylonian pits. Our life essentially went out as our king was taken, of whom we had said, under his shadow we shall live among the nations. See, they had a feeling, you can find this in some of the Psalms, that the king was not violable. He couldn't be violated. As long as he was alive and functioning, they were fine. But Zedekiah wasn't. Let me read my version of these four lines, and then we'll look at what happened to Zedekiah. The king is dead, and so are we. That's their sentiment. Zedekiah tried to escape, but he was captured. He was our strength for battle. Exile and death faces us. The Lord's anointed, as I mentioned, was a reference to the king, who in this case wasn't truly Yahweh's anointed, but he was Nebuchadnezzar's anointed. So Zedekiah was not God's man. Zedekiah was merely Babylon's lackey and not part of the Davidic throne, at least until 588 BC, and his effort to repel against Nebuchadnezzar put an end to it all. Jeremiah, if you want to go to chapter 39, starting in verse 2, he would tell about the breaching of the walls of Jerusalem by Babylon, and Zedekiah, looking for a way out, found a gate between two walls, went out, started to run into the desert, but he was caught. And then his fate, and I think I'll not bother reading about his fate here, just simply tell you, he was caught, his sons were killed in front of him while he watched, and then his eyes were put out, so that the last thing he saw was the death of all his sons. Then he was sent to Babylon. So, as far as the people were concerned, their hope exited with Zedekiah. Well, next time we're going to look at the two verses that finish chapter 4. But since there are only two verses, it's hard to talk about two verses. There are people who do it. It's hard to talk for 20, 30, 40 minutes with two verses. But never fear, because these two verses refer to Edom. Now, Edom hasn't really entered into the scene here. But there is a book in the Old Testament, a one-chapter book of 21 verses that speaks about Edom and Edom's demise. That's the book of Obadiah. We looked at Obadiah a couple years ago, and I'm going to read from Obadiah for our look at